Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I've spent 22 years caring for objects that tell the story of human existence. That's my job. I'm a senior conservator at the Smithsonian Institution, specializing in artifact preservation and restoration. I've handled documents signed by presidents, tools used by ancient peoples, artwork that survived wars and disasters. Every object that passes through my hands carries weight beyond its physical form. Weight of memory, weight of meaning, weight of all the human lives that touched it before mine. My name is Nadia Hollister. I'm 45 years old. I've worked in the same building for over 2 decades, walking the same corridors, breathing the same climate-controlled air, dedicating my life to ensuring that what humans have created survives to tell its story. My husband Thomas used to tease me about it. He said I cared more about the dead than the living. He was a historian, so he understood the impulse, but he thought I took it too far. Thomas died 3 years ago. Cancer. Quick and merciless. The way cancer sometimes is. I buried him in a cemetery outside the city, and I went back to work 3 days later because the objects needed me and I needed them. The past doesn't leave you. The past stays exactly where you put it, waiting for you to return. I always believed that preservation was a form of love, that caring for objects was a way of honoring everyone who came before, that the Smithsonian, with its 154 million artifacts, was the largest act of remembrance in human history. I didn't know how right I was. I didn't know what remembrance really meant. 2 months ago, I was promoted to a position I didn't know existed: Senior Conservator for Special Collections. My supervisor, a woman named Dr. Fern, who had always treated me with distant professionalism, called me into her office and explained that the position was a recognition of my expertise and discretion. 22 years of service, a reputation for careful work and careful silence, the qualities they needed for what came next. I was given new clearance levels, new access codes, new responsibilities that weren't fully explained. I was told that my predecessor, Dr. Emil Vasquez, had retired after 30 years in the position. When I asked how to contact him for guidance, Dr. Fern's expression flickered. She said he had passed away, heart attack, 2 weeks after leaving the Smithsonian. She said it like it was routine, like 30-year veterans of classified positions dying within days of retirement was perfectly normal. I should have asked more questions. I should have been suspicious, but I trusted the institution. I'd given it 22 years of my life. I believed it had earned my faith. The first time I descended to sublevel 7, I thought there had been a mistake. The elevator went deeper than any building diagram showed. The corridors at the bottom were older than the museum's official construction date, lined with stone that predated any architecture I recognized. The security wasn't electronic, it was architectural. Doors that could only be opened in specific sequences. Passages that seemed designed to confuse intruders, to trap anyone who didn't know the exact route. Dr. Fern walked me through the maze without hesitation. She'd been doing this for years, I realized. She knew every turn, every door, every step of the path that led to what the Smithsonian had hidden since its founding. The first chamber stopped my heart. Behind glass, in a climate-controlled environment, sat a figure, a man, apparently middle-aged, dressed in clothing from the early 19th century. He was sitting at a desk, bent over a large book, writing with a pen that moved in steady, unhurried strokes. He didn't look up when we entered. He didn't acknowledge our presence in any way. Dr. Fern told me he'd been sitting there, writing, for over 200 years. I didn't believe her. I couldn't believe her. But I watched him write. I watched the pen move across the paper. I watched the pages fill with text in a hand that never wavered, never tired, never stopped. And I understood that I was seeing something that shouldn't exist. There were more. Dozens of chambers, each containing a figure. Different clothing from different eras. Ancient robes that might have been Egyptian or Mesopotamian. Medieval garments, dark and heavy. Renaissance attire with careful embroidery. Victorian dress, prim and formal. All of them writing or drawing or documenting in some form. All of them silent. All of them appearing completely human. All of them clearly not. Dr. Fern explained what I was seeing. The beings had been encountered throughout human history. Every culture had stories about them. The Egyptians called them the scribes of eternity. The Greeks called them the watchers. Medieval Europeans thought they were angels or demons, recording human sins for judgment. Every civilization that developed writing eventually noticed that some writers never stopped, never aged, never died, never explained. The practice of containing them stretched back further than any single institution. The Smithsonian had inherited its collection from older sources: European royal archives, Vatican vaults, Chinese imperial repositories. Wherever humans built lasting institutions, they eventually found themselves custodians of beings who simply watched and recorded. The beings required nothing. No food, no water, no light, no air. They simply existed and documented. They didn't respond to communication, didn't react to stimuli, didn't seem aware of their containment. If they could see outside their chambers, they documented what they saw. If they could only see the walls of their cells, they documented that. The writing never stopped. The observation never ceased. I asked what they were documenting. Dr. Fern led me to the archive. Volumes upon volumes, stretching back thousands of years. Documentation of events, people, places, moments. Historical records that predated any human writing system. Drawings of people and events rendered with precision that cameras couldn't match. The beings had been documenting human existence since before we could document ourselves. I spent weeks in that archive. I read accounts of events that historians have debated for centuries, described in perfect detail. The construction of Stonehenge, the fall of Rome, the Black Death spreading across Europe. Events rendered not with interpretation or analysis, but with simple, clinical precision. What happened, when it happened, who was there, what they said and did and felt. The beings don't editorialize, they don't explain, they simply record. Every moment of human history, captured by observers who never participated, never interfered, never communicated with the subjects of their documentation. I cross-referenced their records with known history. Everything I could verify matched perfectly. Dates, names, locations. The beings don't make mistakes. Their documentation is more accurate than any human record, more complete than any archive we've ever assembled. I began to trust the documents, began to believe that what they recorded was true. That's when I found the volumes that documented events that haven't happened yet. The documentation doesn't end at the present. It continues. Future events recorded with the same clinical precision as past ones. Elections that won't be held for years. Disasters that haven't occurred. Deaths of people who are still alive. I found my own death documented, a Tuesday in late November, 11 years from now. A stroke, sudden and massive, at my desk in the conservation lab. The being who documented it included details, what I was working on when it happened, the expression on my face, the way my body fell. I read the account of my own ending written in the steady hand of something that had watched humanity since before we could speak, something that knew my future because my future was already part of its record. I kept reading. I couldn't stop. I found the deaths of people I loved, friends, colleagues, family members I hadn't spoken to in years, all of them documented, all of them inevitable. And I found the final volumes. The documentation of humanity doesn't continue forever. It has an ending, a last chapter, a final entry, after which the pages are blank. The date is less than a century away. The beings don't record what comes after, perhaps because there's nothing to record, perhaps because humanity simply ends, perhaps because whatever purpose the observation serves will be complete and there will be no need to continue. I don't know what ends us. The documentation doesn't explain. It simply records the final events, the last moments, the conclusion of the story that began before we could tell stories ourselves. And then it stops. I tried to understand what I'd found. I searched the archives for explanation, for theory, for anything that would help me comprehend what the beings were and why they did what they did. I found correspondence between Smithsonian officials and their counterparts at other institutions. Centuries of speculation, theories proposed and abandoned, questions asked and never answered. Some believed the beings were time travelers, documenting history for some future archive. Others thought they were visitors from another dimension, studying our reality for purposes we couldn't fathom. Some proposed that they existed outside time entirely, that past and future were equally accessible to them, equally present. But no theory had ever been confirmed. The beings don't explain. They don't communicate. No one has ever exchanged a single word with them in all the centuries they've been observed. The most disturbing theory I found was proposed by a Vatican scholar in 1743. He suggested that the beings weren't observers in any sense we understand. They weren't collecting data. They weren't reporting to anyone. They were simply recording because that's what they are. That's their nature. Their entire existence is to document humanity. We are their medium, their purpose. Without us, they have nothing to observe. Without them, we have no record, no story, no meaning. The scholar proposed that the beings would cease to exist when humanity ceased to exist, that they were part of us, inseparable from us, bound to us in ways we couldn't comprehend. They weren't watching us from outside. They were the watching itself. The mechanism by which our existence became recorded, became real, became a story instead of random events. I read that theory and I felt something shift in my understanding. Something that had been horror became something else, something stranger, something almost like recognition. We've always felt watched. We've always sensed something observing us. We've always believed, on some level, that our lives mattered to someone, that someone was paying attention, that the universe cared what happened to us. Perhaps these beings are why. Perhaps the sense of being observed that haunts every human consciousness is simply the awareness, buried deep, that we are being documented, that every moment of our existence is being recorded by something that has watched us since the beginning. I broke protocol 3 weeks after my first visit to sublevel 7. The oldest being in the collection has been contained since the Smithsonian's founding. He appears to be a man in his 50s, dressed in clothing that the archivist dated to the late Byzantine period. He's been writing continuously for over 1,000 years. I entered his chamber. I spoke to him. I asked questions, introduced myself, tried everything I could think of to elicit some response. I wrote notes and held them in front of his eyes. I showed him photographs. I even touched his shoulder gently, carefully, hoping for some acknowledgement. He didn't look up, didn't pause in his writing, didn't acknowledge me in any way. But I noticed something. The document he was working on. I leaned closer, read the words forming under his pen. He was recording the present moment, my visit, my questions, my attempts at communication. Every word I spoke was being transcribed into the endless record. Every gesture I made was being documented. My appearance, my expressions, my emotional state. I wasn't being ignored. I was being recorded. That's all the beings do. That's all any of them have ever done. I sat down across from him and watched him write about me watching him. The document described a human trying to understand why she was being documented. It captured my confusion, my fear, my growing sense of something vast and incomprehensible. It described me with perfect accuracy, better than I could describe myself. The being saw things about me that I didn't know were visible. Grief I thought I'd hidden. Loneliness I didn't want to acknowledge. The way I'd used my work to avoid dealing with Thomas's death. The way I'd made preservation into a substitute for living. All of it was there. All of it was being recorded. All of it would be preserved in volumes that would outlast me, outlast the Smithsonian, outlast everything I'd ever known. I understood something then. The beings aren't separate from humanity. They're part of how we exist. Every moment of human history has been observed because observation is part of the structure of our reality. The beings are the mechanism by which our existence becomes a story. Without them, we would just be events, random occurrences with no shape, no meaning, no narrative. They make us real. They make us matter. They transform our lives from chaos into chronicle. We're not their subjects. We're their purpose. Without us, they have nothing to observe. Without them, we have no record, no memory, no story that persists beyond our brief lives. The relationship is symbiotic in a way I can barely comprehend. They need us. We need them. We've always needed each other, since before we knew they existed, since before we could articulate what it meant to be watched. I returned to my normal work. I process artifacts, restore documents, care for objects that tell the story of human achievement. I do my job the way I've always done it, Nothing has changed, and everything has changed. I know when I'm going to die now. I know the date, the circumstance, the details. I could change my behavior, avoid the conservation lab on that Tuesday in November, try to escape the fate the beings have recorded. But I don't think it would work. The documentation is too accurate, too complete. If I could escape, if the future could be changed, the beings would have recorded that too. They would have documented my attempt, my success or failure, whatever actually happens. What's written in their records is what will happen, not because they control it, not because they cause it, simply because they see all of time the way I see a book on a shelf, complete and whole and already written. I could despair. I could rage against the knowledge that my future is already documented, that humanity's ending is already recorded, that nothing we do changes what has already been written in volumes we can't access. But instead, I find myself at peace. I've spent 22 years believing that preservation matters, that caring for objects is a form of love, that the past deserves to be remembered and the future deserves to know what came before. Now I know that preservation is built into the structure of existence, that everything has been recorded, that nothing is truly lost. Every moment, every person, every brief human life has been captured by observers who never missed a detail, never forgot a face, never let a single instant slip away unremembered. Even the ending is preserved. Even the conclusion is documented. The story of humanity will exist as long as the being's records exist, perhaps longer. Perhaps the documentation itself is eternal, existing somewhere outside time, a complete account of everything we ever were. I visit sublevel 7 sometimes. I watch the beings work. I read their documentation of the present moment and see myself described in their endless records. I'm not afraid of being observed anymore. I'm grateful for it, grateful that someone is watching, grateful that the story is being told, grateful that when it's over, there will be a record. We've always wanted our lives to mean something. We've always hoped that someone was paying attention. We've always felt deep in our bones that we weren't alone, that something was watching. Now I know something is. It has been watching since before we could watch ourselves. It will watch until there's nothing left to see. And everything we've ever done, everyone we've ever been, will be preserved in records that will outlast us all. I think about Thomas sometimes. His death is documented somewhere in those volumes. His whole life is documented. Every moment we shared, every word we exchanged, every ordinary day we spent together thinking we had more time than we did. He's preserved now, not in my memory, which will fail and fade and eventually end when I do. He's preserved in records that don't deteriorate, don't forget, don't lose a single detail. I find comfort in that, more comfort than I found in any of the rituals of grief. Thomas is documented. Thomas is remembered. Thomas exists in the record, and the record endures. That's what preservation really means. Not the objects I care for, though they matter too. The preservation that matters is the documentation, the observation, the endless record of everything we've ever been. The Smithsonian keeps one exhibit classified, not because it's dangerous, not because it threatens humanity, because it shows us what we've always been, subjects of observation, characters in a record we didn't know was being kept. The beings have watched us since the beginning. They've documented everything. They know how it ends because they've already recorded it. I've read my own death in their records. I've read the final chapter of humanity. I could be afraid, I could despair, but instead, I find myself grateful. Grateful that someone is watching. Grateful that the story is being told. Grateful that when it's over, there will be a record. We've always wanted to be remembered. We've always hoped that our lives would matter to someone, somewhere, somehow. Now I know they do. They always have. They always will. The Smithsonian keeps one exhibit classified. The exhibit is us. It's always been us. And somewhere in those endless volumes, the story is almost complete. I go back to my work. I preserve objects. I care for the past. I do my small part to ensure that what humans have created survives. But I know now that the real preservation is happening elsewhere, in chambers beneath the museum, in the endless documentation of beings who have watched us since the beginning. We are remembered. We are recorded. We are preserved. And that, I've decided, is enough. It has to be enough. Because it's all we've ever had.